All right, so welcome everyone. We're pleased to have with us today Andy Sharpe, the CEO and co-founder of Mesh VI, and Spencer Mitchell, the CEO of Trucker Cloud, as we tackle some of the bigger issues that are out there in the trucking industry from an insurance perspective. And the thing that we're going to be talking about today is probably the number one issue out there in the industry today, and that being fraud and what insurers can do to help mitigate the risks that are out there. And by doing so, keep costs down for the insured. So with that being said, what I'd like to do, Andy, we'll kick off with you. Share a little bit about your background and a little bit about Mesh VI, and then Spencer will follow up with you.
Great. No, we appreciate the opportunity. I've been longtime members of MCIF, going way back to the early 2000s. I'm a second generation trucking insurance nerd. Many of you might have known my father back in the day. We had a retail agency shop and a wholesale agency shop. So I saw the wasted redundant efforts that the motor carriers, the retail agencies, the wholesalers, and the insurance partners would do to just manage vehicles and drivers for insurance purposes. So we originally was born Fleet Vims out of that, and now our brand is Mesh VI to better recognize how we're more than just fleet. We can handle non-fleet, and we're all about connecting and verifying insurance.
All right, Spencer.
Yeah, Jim, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us on. Spencer Mitchell, CEO of Trucker Cloud. Trucker Cloud is a telematics data platform for commercial auto insurers and trucking insurers. We are a device agnostic telematics data platform, so we allow insurance companies to run UBI and telematics programs in a device agnostic way. So we integrate with about 70 different telematics providers, including ELDs and cameras. Insurers use that data for underwriting, for loss control, for claims, and just overall increasing profitability across the book, whether it's leaked VINs or leaked miles or some of the things we'll talk about today. We support probably the majority of telematics programs in the industry today, 3 of the top 6 insurers, about 30 overall. And looking forward to this conversation to talk about how insurers can mitigate risks, especially associated with fraud.
So that's great. And we're thrilled to have you both. So let's jump right in with this issue at hand. How have you've both been around for a while and you've seen the industry both from the inside and out. So how have you seen fraud evolving in the industry? And what do you think are some of the key drivers behind the way that it's evolving?
If I could jump in on this one from the insurance side, or insurance agency background, I helped our father run it since early 2000s. The evolution of the certificate of insurance, right? It used to be on a typewriter and mailed. You had the special envelopes with the see-through to go to the certificate holders. We used to have to stuff those envelopes. It was a mess. To the Adobe PDF. That was the secure format, not editable. Okay, we trust this document. Wait a second. Now everybody and their sister has an Adobe PDF editor. So that's the biggest thing for me, is that evolution of being able to edit a document and then being able to spoof emails. And everybody's been learning how about phishing, scams, etc. These cyber criminals are so sophisticated. And then you throw in the fact that most of them are overseas. They can really just skirt our laws here and there. So without diving too deep into all the different scenarios that can be, that simplifying it for me is the evolution of that certificate of insurance and the way you can manipulate and impersonate it.
Yeah, and then when we thought we could watermark Adobe PDF files, we were really secure, right?
Yeah, and then password protect.
Exactly. Exactly. Spencer, any insights from you as far as how you've seen the evolution of fraud?
I mean, this is I think if you go to IFA, I think it's International Factoring Association or their conference, they talk about fraud more than anything these days, especially over the last couple of years. Same with places like TIA, transportation intermediaries. Fraud isn't just an issue in insurance; it's an issue across freight, right? And there's a funny story here. The starting of Trucker Cloud was to use ELD data to track freight for factoring purposes, because there was a large factor who got defrauded. I don't know the number. It was in the 7 figures around a fake carrier. So they created a fake carrier, a fake shipper, and started factoring these invoices of that carrier carrying for the shipper, built up this huge credit line. And it turns out that there was no carrier, there was no shipper. So there was an idea that you could use ELD data to verify that a truck went from point A to point B and say, yeah, that load actually got carried. There is a real carrier here. There's real equipment here. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago. I think that was kind of the start of they weren't looking out for that because it wasn't occurring then, but it is occurring now, and it's all across the board in different ways.
So when we look at fraud and we look at the number of common types that are out there, what are you saying in the forefront today? Spencer, you just laid out some really good points. Andy, you laid out some good points as well. But as far as what's in the forefront today, what are you seeing as the most common that people need to be aware of?
People are talking about double brokering more than anything that I'm hearing, right, Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the tops. And it goes back to that certificate of insurance and proving who is, well, I guess the double brokering scenario doesn't get as impacted by it, but we're seeing a lot that are the impersonation of a motor carrier or a freight broker. And that's where that double brokering comes into play. For those that may not be aware of the double brokering, usually, or not usually, but what's happening in a lot of the cases is a fake website is put up by somebody in Eastern Europe purporting to be a freight broker. They take that load from a load board and then broker it to another freight broker who then gives it to a motor carrier, the last two being real. The original fake freight broker tries to collect the funds from that shipper, does so, and then nobody downstream ever gets them. So then you get into coverage issues out the wazoo. But that's definitely high on the list. But that impersonating of certificate of insurance, or Rob Mosley, many of you at MCAF conferences have heard him talk about the insure 3, run 5 problem, meaning you insure 3 trucks, which are actually running 5. So if you're using some of these insurance verification systems, they're usually not up to date on live data, the live schedules of units. So that's where we come into play. Help with that live vehicle level insurance certificates. And now with our new collaboration with Trucker Cloud, to be able to say, hey, we've got 2 missing units here. We had miles running in the last day or 7 days or whatever the scenario is. And all of a sudden you can decide as the insurer or a freight broker that sees that data, either don't do business with that potentially fraudulent motor carrier, or maybe it was just negligence that they forgot to add it, and then they get to add it more quickly than after an accident and not having any coverage.
Yeah, there's kind of 2 areas of this. There's fraud, and then there's potentially just leakage and sort of negligence in that, right? On the fraud side, well, let me talk about the leakage side first, Andy, because you were touching on that. We see leakage averages between 5 and 15% across an insurance portfolio based on the number of VINs that are running on a daily basis. So the ELD data will tell you, because ELDs are federally mandated, as long as you're traveling over a certain number of air miles, of course. We see all the time, okay, there's 5 units on the policy, but there's 7 running. There's 6 units on the policy, but there's 9 running. There's 20 on the policy, but there's 45 running. And what happens is it ticks up over the course of a year. So as the course, especially as the freight market hopefully continues to get better in 2025, you're going to see freight companies, you're going to see these logistics companies growing, right? And they're going to be getting more trucks to carry more loads and get more revenue because the market's back. Well, oftentimes they're not updating their insurance policies, right? They're not necessarily letting the insurance carrier know. And so those are leaked VINs. You also have leaked miles because you have a lot of mileage reporting policies out there that are based on IFTAs. IFTAs don't capture oftentimes personal conveyance miles. And so that's not fraud, but that's just leakage, right? You can talk about zone and geographic leakage. Hey, how often does this motor carrier run through downtown Atlanta? Oh, they never go through Georgia, right? Well, you take a look at data and they're just traveling up and down 75, 85 in Georgia. And then the last piece that we see quite often is, not quite often, but it does happen, operations that might run in the West Coast or Southwest. We'll see claims that are reported in Arizona, and then you check telematics data on that VIN, and that VIN was in Mexico all day, but coverage doesn't extend to Mexico. So then as soon as they come back up in Arizona, they'll report a claim, 4 days later, but that claim really, you could see on the telematics data that there was a crash in Mexico 4 days ago. And so that is more of an intentional fraud than these other cases with there's a lot of leakage out there as well. So as it relates to insurance, there's so much capture, I think, of the of that combined ratio that can be attributed to leakage or fraud, whether it be intentional or unintentional.
Mhm. So the only item that we haven't touched on yet, I mean, you've touched on the leakage, you've touched on double brokering, obviously the falsified claims that come along with the format that's out there today, and keeping up with the insured units. What about cargo theft? What trends are you seeing there? What's on your forefront right now? What are you keeping your eye on?
Yeah, if I can jump on in this one, had a great conversation with J.W. Taylor after the last MCIF conference, and we were talking through some scenarios on what we can do to help fight cargo theft and also the fraud, to where with our system being live, shared, verified insurance, at the time of booking, integrating on a load board, make sure that VIN is covered, that there's a driver coverage on that VIN, that the consignee receiving side of that, make sure you can scan that driver's license or scan that VIN and make sure, hey, Spencer Mitchell's trucking actually has Spencer Mitchell driving for him, and it's not Jim showing up driving Spencer and he's not approved, because that could be a stolen load that's partially offloaded. You hear some of this cargo theft where talking about leakage, it could be a partial cargo theft. They still deliver 60% of the load, and these crime rings are so smart, they intentionally do that knowing it's going to be 45 to 60 days before that's caught. And they've walked away with all those tens of thousands of merchandise.
Yeah, I don't know what the right answer to this. I think, Andy, you're on it, which is a live certificate of insurance. I wish I had an answer, but instead I have a story, which is I was talking to an insurer a couple of weeks ago, and they had a falsified carrier who showed up for a high worth load, and it happened to be like 3 high-end vehicles, like Lamborghini and this and that, right? Probably $1 million worth of vehicles. So falsified carrier shows up, put the DOT sticker on the side of the vehicle, picks up the load. Those cars disappeared forever. They actually found one of the cars in like South Texas or something of that sort. I don't know why it got dropped off, whatever it may be. But it was that simple to just show up with a DOT, a non-live certificate of insurance, and you picked up $1 million worth of, 3 cars, which are so easy to steal. You don't have to offload them. You're not offloading a bunch of iPads, right? Those things are so easy to, to offload to wherever. And that was it. That was the case. And it seems like a live COI is the best thing I've heard that could potentially combat that.
It's good insights. It's crazy the things that happen out there, and it's very it's insightful as far as how advanced, how sophisticated, how well, sophistication is the best way to go. I mean, it seems like we're either a step behind and trying to become a step ahead, or we're just a step ahead of what's taking place. And right now, within the trucking industry, I think cargo theft is a step ahead without question. And it's something that's presenting as a serious issue. And the short amount of time that it takes to get goods stateside to out of the country, or stateside into some warehousing scenario, or whatever the case may be, and then not be discoverable it's incredible how quickly it happens. It's incredible. So
Yeah, the key is getting all the supply chains involved. That's why freight brokers and shippers are spending a lot of money with these great monitoring tools out there, that are doing their best with the operational inefficiencies that are available to getting a certificate verification or insurance policy verification. There's a certain group out there that most retail agencies in this audience, I'm sure, work with, that ask for copies of a scheduled unit policy. And then once you change, well, there's a lot of operational time wasted there. And then, well, if you were on vacation or somebody didn't communicate that, then maybe something fell through the cracks and all of a sudden there's a big theft. So they're invested, that logistics side is invested heavily, and they're doing a better job than our insurance industry has been doing to make sure that visibility. They're already integrating on the ELDs and looking at this insurance policies. The insurance industry is not doing that until now. So that's why we're excited to be partnering with Trucker Cloud on this.
Yeah. So let's talk about the platform you're coming from, and that is where does technology fit into this fight? How can data analytics, how can AI, how can all these tools help prevent or detect fraud going forward? What are your thoughts on it?
Andy, you take it first. I've got to circle my thoughts on this. Big question.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, we could spend an hour on just that. I keep
Mhm.
coming back to transparency. Transparency. If you've been hearing a lot about the AI, of course, in recent months, but some of you may have been urged by, especially financial planners or others, to not use real code words because somebody can now spoof your voice, spoof you on a Zoom call. They could sound like your own mother and you won't know it. That's how good it is. So people are being taught to come up with keywords that would be impossible to figure out if you're an AI. Don't give your real birth date. Intentionally give 3 months off in 4 days or whatever. So what I'm getting to there is you have to trust. You trust that answer to be incorrect because y'all previously came up with a test case scenario. Well, if you go right to the source, meaning the person you trust, then there's no bad actor that can, I think, eliminate that. Or I'm not doing a good job explaining this. No bad actor can succeed in that scenario if you have some safeguards in place. That's why that live transparency of insurance throughout the supply chain to the motor carriers, the freight brokers, the lien holders, the retail agency, the wholesale broker, and the insurance company, et cetera, that we provide by having more eyeballs on it, it's trusted data. It's hard to be fraudulent with that.
I agree. I was going to say something similar, Andy. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand on it, it would be the combination, the triangulation of a lot of different data points, right? It would be, is the COI live? Can I verify that? Does the ELD read the same type of equipment that's supposed to be picking up this vehicle and the same DOT in the ELD account? Does it have, it would be great to, throw a tracker. We don't do this, but throw a tracker in a piece of cargo. And as soon as that thing gets somewhat off the route of where it should be going, you should be able to pick that up, right? And I think, to your point, shippers and brokers are at this point doing a better job of this than insurance companies. And it's like there's a big difference between the cargo theft and the fraud there, and like insurance carriers writing auto liability policies, right? Fraud in auto liability policies, I think, we're at a place where we can capture a lot of that in kind of the leakage conversations, because those are long-term relationships. Hey, you maybe forgot to throw this VIN on, or I'm not seeing that vehicle in that place, that crash, something occurred. But fraud and the cargo theft happens so quickly and it's so intentional that the only way to beat something that's that intentional and that smart is to triangulate enough data points where one of them is off. You've got your case. And I think there are some good solutions out there for brokerages that have started to use these different types of data. You can verify liens on the equipment with COIs, with ELD and telematics data, with information about, the hauling equipment. Like there's a lot of pieces, but who has the time, who has technology to put all those pieces together and go, yeah, all right, they all match, right? 9 of the 10 match, it's a no-go. And you really got to figure out what all those pieces are, especially in the cargo space, because it's so intentional and they're so smart.
So Spencer, you just hit on a number of things that I think tie this together very nicely. So you touched on telematics and part of that triangulation. That would, in essence, address driver behaviors. You'd be able to assess risks at the time that they're happening. If it is, in essence, with the driver or any change of direction or path or whatever the case may be, in addition to the COIs being live. So I think you've touched on a number of things that I think are right to they get right to the point of what it is we need to be doing as an industry from a technology perspective, as far as bringing together the appropriate pieces that need to be together to help put some true safeguards in place. If you had an opportunity to say, hey, here are the best practices for mitigating fraud, just based upon what we're seeing, and stepping outside of what you've just said, things like, how would you vet a carrier? What would be some things that you look for? How would you look at contracts, maybe similarly or differently than you're looking at them today? What kind of training? So let's talk to me about what you would recommend to folks out there as best practices to help mitigate fraud today.
From brokerage side or from a carrier side?
From a brokerage side.
Or
Well,
brokerage.
let's do both. Let's
Yeah.
touch on both.
Hmm. I don't know, Andy, how much you want to talk about other, different solutions that are out there. I think there are some interesting ones that are triangulating more and more data points.
Yeah, there's one that's really growing and doing a great job out there that is doing a few more tools, but then there's others that do it in a different way and have a broader market. So it gets tricky on depending on the audience and the subset of the freight broker side. There's some great platforms out there that are just missing that insurance live side that we're excited to offer to them. And I believe will elevate the whole industry. So we're very excited to help them with that. But back to what to do is just research what tools are out there for your specific needs. The key with AI these days, especially whether it's Chat GPT or Perplexity, et cetera, is to learn a phrase called prompt engineering. Don't just go type into Google or a Chat GPT or like you do with a Google. You need to say, from the perspective of an expert United States freight broker, what are the best practices? So do prompt engineering to your specific subset, and then say for ones that do refrigerated loads only or high value cars, et cetera. Because then you'll learn there's a bunch of different software that can do really good things in the various niches and then put them into your workflow that you need. Because if it's a high value, like we've even heard of a group that's doing, I forget what you call like a nanoparticle stamp type of thing that you can do on high risk loads, let alone the geofencing. So I'd say prompt engineering to your subset needs be really helpful.
I'm gonna go the opposite direction of saying it's people.
There you go.
It's hiring people that are super curious and are just going to dig, 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 dig. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And there's so much technology out there, there's so many solutions out there that someone in the organization has access to. And the people who have that strong, and I mean, this is coming from, people who are business owners running businesses, like those are the people you want on your team, right? The ones who keep asking questions and like, doesn't feel right, doesn't feel right, doesn't feel right, but they go and find the answer themselves, right? They might spend 3 hours on something that seemed silly. Like, why did you dig on that thing for 3 hours? Well, I dug on that thing for 3 hours because I found that, we just saved $1 million by not getting, not getting the wool pulled over our eyes on a cargo theft. And I think there's a lot of signs, but they're not obvious. There's just like feelings that people have that say, man, this doesn't feel right. Something's wrong here. And then you can use the technology, you can use the tools to dig into that where it doesn't feel right.
Yeah, no, I love your people answer on that. And I'd take it a step further. Surround yourself with experts in the field you're trying to work with. That, not to be a blunt plug for MCIF, but that's what MCIF does. They put you around trucking expert insurance professionals. So use the resources that you have within your mix, or say, hey, Jim, do you know anybody in the freight broker space that I can connect with? Ask for introductions for people that are experts in that niche that you want to learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It goes back to being, having people who are super curious. You've got to have those people to, kind of connect all the dots and figure out how they can find when things don't feel right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I like Spencer where you took the conversation, and the reason being just next week we're offering a class on fraud, and part of the class on fraud has become a core component of our TRS designation, which I'm sure you guys are both familiar with. And in doing so, what we've done is we're saying, okay, let's take a look at fraud, but let's look at it from two different perspectives. Let's look at it through the underwriting process and what we discover along that path. And then let's look at it from the freight, the certificate of insurance, the double brokerage, all the things that happen out there. So we're kind of doing, I'll say, a left of boom, and then right of boom analysis through that class. So in looking at the underwriting process, how do you think we can automate or streamline some of the efforts that need to be done while at the same time being cognizant of what is out there from a fraud perspective? In other words, how can we streamline what we're doing and still be as effective as we are today, or more effective than we are today? Any ideas or recommendations, suggestions?
Go ahead, Andy.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks a lot, Spencer. Utilize the tools that we've been talking about on this call. That'll tremendously help. And and various other ones and partners at MCIF and some others that we're all aware, or many of us are aware of.
I think MCIF does have the right people and the right technology and the right things there to make underwriting more efficient. I was talking to somebody the other day who said basically when we underwrite an account, we know that there's a VIN and it's probably domiciled in, X state, and it's worth this much because we have price digest information, and we know it lies under that DOT, and you've got the violation, inspection information, those sorts of things as well. But that's it. It's like we kind of don't know anything else about that fleet. We don't really know where they travel. We don't really know how much they travel, how often they travel. And we've got VINs that we can see they travel 5,000 miles a month. We've got other ones that travel 25,000 miles a month. And you can see that in telematics data. And it's like that's 5 times the exposure right there, right? But you have to have that granular level of data in order to understand that. And when you look at trucking underwriting, when you're looking at a handful of things from that underwriting perspective, I mean, you're looking at the equipment, you're looking at the value of the equipment, you're looking at the loss runs. That these are all things insurers traditionally collect. But then you have to estimate so many of these other things. You have to estimate the miles. You have to estimate where they travel. You have to estimate the radius of operation. You have to estimate their driver behavior based on where they've the losses in the past, right? And you really don't have any idea how these things work, right? And that is a place where, I mean, this is I'm trying my best not to plug and say, hey, you can get all of these things that are underwriting variables and stop estimating them, but actually be able to understand them and not spend 8 hours trying to figure out how many miles they possibly traveled or where their inspections were. I mean, the rate of inspections in California is I think it's 24 times the rate of inspections in Virginia. And so if you use that information, you go, oh, well, they must run in California a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the case, right? You have to actually know where people travel and how much they travel and that sort of information. So it's really, from my perspective, what I believe, it's getting more granular information on where they travel. And there's other ways to do that too. I learned of a system recently that has set up cameras all around the country, and they take pictures of every 18-wheeler that travels through that area. And so they start to pinpoint and dot where these vehicles are across the country and what type of cargo they carry. And you can start to get a sense of maybe how far they travel, what's their radius. So there are other ways outside of telematics data to do that as well. I think there's a lot of really interesting use cases, solutions, technologies out there.
Yes, and that piece that you just touched on, what a huge leap from an equipment theft perspective, from a trailer theft perspective, from a cargo theft perspective, tracking vehicles, et cetera. I mean, it's a huge leap in the direction that we need to go in based on what's out there today. We've talked about data in a lot of different ways. Having come from the trucking side of the industry into the insurance side of the industry, can you share from your perspectives your definition of big data? We talk a lot about in the insurance industry the use of data, the use of telematics, the use of a lot of different databases, if you will, and then the compilation of those databases. From your perspectives, how would you define from the trucking industry big data?
To me, big data is more than the amount of data that you can manage in an Excel spreadsheet. It's like, hey, we're getting to a place where we need a data engineer. We need to stand up databases. We need to do something with this. And there's some insurance companies that we see out there who are, they're in front of the game on this. They're actually putting data into Snowflake, which is a combination of your multiple cloud environments. You can stick your AWS data in there and your GCP data and these various sources. And then you have others who are still running on Excel spreadsheets, and they say that's just how we run and that's how we've always run. And so to me, big data is it doesn't have to be big data, but it's more than you can manage in an Excel spreadsheet. And that's where it gets to the triangulation of data, right? You kind of need big data in order to triangulate data. Otherwise, there's nothing to triangulate.
Yeah,
Thanks for that.
And then being in trucking, of course, have to think about FMCSA data. So that's a big one to your point, million plus rows and a lot of that. So you need to use a tool like gigasheet.com or something to analyze those big spreadsheets for those that don't have database engineers, et cetera.
Mhm.
Any of those layers you can put on. We use the term for those of you who get a property mapping, those GIS data, anything you can layer upon each other. So if you see a map and you want to put the weather, you want to put the terrain or whatever, anything you can layer on and then analyze it. And that's where this AI is going to be really powerful, is to do that. But garbage data in, garbage AI data out. So you got to be careful with what AI sources. Always check your source within those prompts, because I've seen a lot of bad answers.
Yeah, Andy, the really cool space, and again, Magic Wand World, is where you could take the live insurance data, you could take the policy information, you could take the FMCSA inspection violation data, you could take telematics data, and you could run a prompt and go, hey, tell me everything you know about this carrier, right? Where they run, how, so you're not actually looking at the data, but you're just looking at what the AI is spitting out. But to your point, that's got to be relatively clean going in. And you can use AI to clean data as it goes in too, right? But you still got to look at the output and know you could say, hey, clean this data, and it comes up with something totally different. And we're getting closer, but
We're very close. We have
yeah.
our
It's amazing at the speed that this is moving. It is amazing the speed that
Mhm.
it's moving.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
So
when ChatGPT first, sorry, Jim, when ChatGPT first rolled out, large organizations were talking about, hey, we don't want to use ChatGPT, right? Because all of our prompts that go into that, it's going to be, who knows where that data is going to go, how's it going to be trained, these sorts of things. And so they decided to basically spin up their own instances of ChatGPT. I'm not exactly sure how that works, from a technical architecture perspective, but like, that shouldn't be that far off, where an insurance company, their ChatGPT version is sitting on top of Snowflake, and they can just go, hey, give me what you know about this suite, which somewhat, scares us a little bit, because it somewhat disintermediates the need for like the actual UI software layer if we're all just run by like prompts off of
mhm.
data. But I don't know, that's a little bit of ways away.
Well, yeah, well, we use AWS as an example, and they have their queue, like I guess that's from James Bond or whatever. So you could ask Q, we're going to be embedding that in our platform. So all those different data layers, you can ask it, and we have our VIN history. So we could take those data points from Trucker Cloud and our other integration partners and give that answer for you.
Where do I sign up?
It's coming soon.
Well, one of the things, so we have a sale. One of the things that I did want to touch on today is talking about these different forms of assessment and what they can do. The use-based insurance or user UBI. Um, do you see UBI? How do you see it moving based on all of the data, all the technology, all of the different ways we can assess now what the behaviors are, et cetera? What do you see as UBI becoming, or will it improve risk assessment? Will it not improve risk assessment? What do you see as the direction of that particular style of insuring commercial truckers?
I'll let Spencer answer this mostly because this is his realm, but we've had UBI for decades, mileage-based insurance, right? But
Right.
what he's doing to catch that leakage and stuff is improving. And then knowing the territory that you did or did not go into a metropolitan area, which is a different rating structure than if you went to the rural area, et cetera, is going to be key. But yeah, I'll let you take most of that. But we've had UBI for a while, whether it be revenue or mileage, just it's getting improved.
Well, let me ask a question, Andy. Why doesn't everybody just always have UBI programs? Is it because the administration of those programs is a pain in the butt? You got to collect IFTAs and audit it and all those sorts of things?
Good question. There's so many different underwriters and insurance companies with different thesis on what they're targeting and how they want to handle it. And then there's the operational side of which ELD connection, as an independent contractor, in their independent contractor lease agreement, do they own the asset of that ELD and they plug and play and installation? So there's a lot of operational issues from what I've heard is a big
Yeah.
part of it, especially on the IC realm. I think we'll definitely be getting there more and more who knows? We might have dash cameras required in the coming years.
Right.
And then all of a sudden that data shared,
Right.
which will then, once it's there, it's going to probably be part of the manufacturers on the OEM coming off the
Yeah.
lot. And then it's
Yeah.
just better.
I read something interesting recently about that, though. The fact that one fleet can have, I mean, you're probably not buying all Freightliners, right? And so even if you roll everything off, even if insurance companies in the future world get connected to the OEM data, like that's still not going to be very clean, right? Because you've still got all these different OEMs rolling off a lot with different years, different technologies, different APIs, like those sorts of things.
And
Anyway,
different
to
drivers
answer what?
and different drivers.
Yeah, right. To answer your question about UBI in general, Jim, I hear more and more insurance companies wanting to run, true UBI mileage-based programs. Um, it 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 is difficult. I mean, historically, it's been difficult because you have to get the IFTAs, you have to audit the IFTA, you get the miles each month, and you audit it at the end of the year with IFTAs, and it takes like weeks and months of various people's time. So it's very heavy. And so telematics can definitely help solve that. And you're getting the miles on a daily basis. You can audit it at the end of the year. You can still get IFTAs and compare that, but it's super easy to do at that point. But the IC, I think some insurance companies get concerned with running a UBI program when you start to talk about those ICs, those lease agreements, because they fear that they're missing those miles because that IC came with their own ELD device and they didn't link it up into that same account. So you're missing miles. My argument on that would be you're probably missing those units anyway. Like your VIN leakage is probably greater than the mileage leakage that you would have in a UBI program. So I don't know if that's if that's a real sort of like a made up issue with it.
And what about like hard braking? When you're talking UBI, Jim, are you talking about actual quality of the mile? Were there a lot of hard brakings and things like that? Or are you talking just
Well, I think we could take it in a number of different ways, right? You've got the all of the individual driver performance and behavior mechanisms. You've got the assessment of those, obviously. And then you've got the overall cost factor to insure, because obviously you may not be insuring every vehicle on the road for X amount of miles, et cetera. You've got very limited or a very set scope of how you're insuring across that particular unit. So I think it's twofold. I think it's driver behavior, vehicle behavior, and I also think it's based on how you can control costs, quite frankly, for the motor carrier.
Mm-hmm.
one thing just came to mind, talking about layering data points. So if you got driver A that has a clean MVR, so now with live MVR monitoring, which I still think is the cheapest liability risk reduction you can do for $2 or $3 a month per driver. So embedded in our system, we got zero driver A, clean MVR, driving the same miles, same ELD, but then the next day you got a different driver who has maybe a 6-point or a 12-point score for speeding. They might have driven the exact same way in that particular vehicle. This one has a bigger exposure because the jury is going to get to see that MVR record.
Mm-hmm.
You need to price for it. So then usage based on who's driving it, but doing the exact same behaviors could be different too.
Yeah. We've done some modeling around crash rates, and personally, I think it's so two things. Progressive said at the beginning of 23 in their earnings call, their Q4 22 earnings call, that telematics is the most predictive rating variable they had. And they showed a chart and it was like 4 to 5 times more predictive than their next most predictive rating variable. Now that telematics data, I think, has an 8 to 12 times lift from top decile to bottom decile. Now, what is that made up of? We were kind of we talked about geography, we talked about miles, we've talked about driver behavior. I think it's like a third, realistically. A third being how they drive, the driver behavior components. But I think a lot of times insurance companies or even fleets might overweight that. Then a third of it is where they drive. There's a big difference between downtown Atlanta and, rural North Carolina, rural Georgia, right? And then then also in that there's the jurisdictional geographical component, right? And then there's the how much they drive, which is maybe rightly reported sometimes, maybe not, right? And so you combine those things together and you get a more accurate picture of them. And I think you've got a really good picture of that risk and that exposure. That being said, I think a lot of times we talk about UBI programs and people want to talk about driver behavior. But really, if you were just capturing those other two pieces, the geography and how much they travel, I think you're capturing a lot of that risk. I was talking to a CEO of an insurance company one time who said, my dream is to be able to charge a rate per mile based on the riskiness of that mile, of that road segment. And there are solutions out there to understand crash rates per road segment, right? And so you start to put that information together, and maybe UBI doesn't have to be so like stick focused. Hey, I'm going to fix this driver. I'm going to fix this driver. I'm going to stop their hard braking, all these sorts of things. It's actually just, hey, let's create transparency. If you share data with me, I can get a better picture of it and stop bothering you about how many miles you drive and where you drive and these sorts of things. And I think UBI, like, it gets painted in somewhat of a negative light sometimes as being a stick focused on driver behavior, where really it should be a carrot focused on transparency and ease of business. That's really what UBI should be focused on, in my opinion.
Well, we've got time. I've got one last question that I want to fire your way. And I just want your kind of open and honest feedback here. Stepping back and looking at the motor carrier now, how do you think they can foster a better commitment? There's already a commitment to safety, but how do you think they can foster a commitment to safety and to ethical behavior based on some of the fraudulent issues we're seeing today that involve drivers in some way, shape, or form, or members of their teams in some way, shape, or form? Not saying they're all like that. We know that that's not the case, but we all know it. Excuse me. It only takes one or two bad apples to paint a poor picture of the industry. So what would your recommendation be to create a culture, number one, of safety, and number two, of ethical behavior?
I think it goes back to the word we both use now multiple times, Spencer: transparency.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd be curious your thoughts on the MVR side and sort of how do you clean up the history of what's already on record, like public record about a driver, or about a fleet. From the behavioral side, I think rewards programs are really good for drivers. There's a study by an insurance company out of South Africa a handful of years ago, and it's called the Discovery Program, and their influence on positive and safe driving behaviors was tremendous. I mean, it was a great program. And what they did was they gave money back to this is in the personal lines. They gave money back to people for safe driving behaviors. And this works really well in like younger populations, 18 to 25, who are generally riskier populations for driving. And it all came down to the transparency of having like a phone app that gave you how often you braked, how often you speeded, how often you did these various things. And the loss ratio improvement on that program was tremendous. And we haven't really seen that in the US. I don't know how many fleets run that sort of program internally, but like they could be using their Samsara data to drive better behavior by rewarding drivers as opposed to like bringing them in for, that stick session at the end of the day. And Andy, I don't know what you think of like cleaning up the public records, because I don't know as much about that sort of space of like how do you coach around those things that might come up as points on your MVR or violations, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that either for the MVR side, other than make sure they're aware, their PSB or their MVR, that's going to impact their employment.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to impact their pay. If they're cleaner MVR, cleaner record, they're going to get paid a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But then goes kind of what some of you're talking about, like on a Samsara or Netrodyne. I've seen Netrodyne do this at some of the conferences, maybe even MCIF last year, where they talked about how they put it on themselves and they're driving their kids to school, and they didn't realize how they did all these I think they called them California stops or something like that, where you roll through a red stop sign versus come to a hard break, a stop sign. And they didn't realize they were doing that themselves, driving their kids to school. So I think some of that goes back to that usage base and getting the feedback of your drivers, whether you're one truck or 1,000 trucks. Use the data, learn. You might be more confident in your safety program than your drivers are showing it if you have that data, and don't use it as the stick, like you said, as much as the carrot, saying, look, what'd you think about this? And they say, oh, I did a great job today. And you say, well, I've got 3 rolling stop signs if they got the dash cameras, stuff like that, and educate them to be better. I could go into different things. I've heard different scenarios from different customers over the decades, but yeah.
And to that point, treat them like adults, right? That conversation of, hey, if you ever leave here and your MVR is not the squeaky clean MVR, like you're not going to get paid as much at your next job, right? That's an easy, honest conversation where you're just going, hey, I'm treating you like an adult. I'm not bringing you in here to harass you, right? But this is just what I see. And I've got family members who have been truck drivers in the past, and it seemed like it was them feeling disrespected that caused them to sort of cut ties with that trucking company. It was, they were sending me on loads that I didn't want to be on, or that, they told me I was going to be home at this time. And it wasn't that they disliked the job. It was that they disliked the disrespect of the dispatcher or the safety manager, whomever it may be, that ultimately drove them away. It's like,
Yeah, I was going to add the two things on safety culture starts at the top. So whoever the top level management is at that division or company, they need to make sure that if they have a safety director and the safety director wants to do some things that are truly going to help safety, that they don't get overridden by the CEO or president or whoever, because the culture comes from the top. Because then all of a sudden, you preach safety, but you're not backing it up. And the other thing is making sure the dispatchers treat the drivers with respect and honor the safety aspects of the job. Because that's what I've heard so many times over the years is drivers leaving for dispatch.
yeah, that's why you get a lot of those HOS violations, right? Is because the driver might not have wanted to drive. They might have gotten driven by, the office or dispatcher or something of that sort. Yeah.
Great points. Great points. Well, gentlemen, Spencer, Andy, can't thank you enough for being here. And to those listeners out there, if you want to hear more of what Spencer and Andy have to offer, they will be at our annual conference, April 14th through 17 in Orlando, Florida. They will be on stage presenting their technology and also sharing more of their insights and knowledge about the industry. So we ask that you join us there. So again, Andy and Spencer, can't thank you enough for your time and insights today. Really appreciate what you've shared, and thanks for being an active part of MCIEF and helping to educate our members. We truly appreciate you. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate what you're doing for the industry, and appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. And we're looking forward to the 14th.